This video doesn't exist, and maybe you don't either. You are about to witness 5 experiments that will dissolve the most precious illusion you carry, the illusion that you exist, that you choose, that you are free. I am the scientist of your own simulation, and I'm here to show you the bugs in your reality's code. Don't try to understand. Feel. What you're about to experience isn't knowledge, it's an ontological virus that will infect your perception of yourself forever. You think you're watching this video by choice. But here's the first crack in your reality. That choice was made by processes you'll never have access to, in brain regions you'll never control, for reasons that were programmed into you before you were born. The you that thinks it's choosing is just the narrator of a story already being written by forces you can't see. You're not the author of your experience, you're the subtitle. Welcome to the laboratory of impossible freedoms, where every answer reveals that the question was the wrong software trying to debug itself. And here's something that will disturb you. Even your resistance to this idea, even your skepticism, even your desire to prove me wrong, all of it was predicted and programmed before you felt it. The neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga calls it the interpreter, a module in your brain that creates stories to explain actions that were already taken by other parts of your brain. You're not living life, you're narrating it after it happens. But if choice is an illusion, what about the chooser? What about the thing that experiences choice? What about consciousness itself? That's where the real horror begins. Most people live their entire lives believing they are the captain of their mental ship, making decisions from some central command center in their mind. But neuroscience has discovered something that would terrify them. There is no captain. There is no command center. There isn't even a ship. What you call your mind is more like a bustling city with millions of citizens, each following their own agenda with no mayor coordinating their actions. Thoughts arise from neural neighborhoods you'll never visit. Emotions bubble up from biochemical districts you can't control. Decisions emerge from vote-counting processes you'll never witness. And somewhere in this chaos, a single voice stands up and claims to be you, to be in charge, to be the one making it all happen. But that voice is just another citizen in the city, no more special than any other, except for its peculiar delusion that it runs the place. You are not the CEO of your consciousness. You are one employee who mistakenly received the CEO's business cards and has been too embarrassed to correct the error. This isn't philosophy. This is measurable, observable, replicable science, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. The question isn't whether you have free will, the question is, who is asking? Let's begin with the first dilemma. I call it the Libet paradox, named after the scientist who accidentally destroyed free will while trying to measure it. Picture this. You're in a laboratory connected to an EEG machine. A scientist asks you to perform a simple task. Flex your wrist whenever you feel like it. No pressure, no timing, complete freedom to choose. You feel the urge, you decide, you act. The sequence seems obvious: intention, decision, action, but the machine tells a different story. 350 milliseconds before you decided to move, your brain already began preparing the movement. The readiness potential, a spike of electrical activity, shows up before consciousness even knows there's a decision to make. You didn't choose to move, movement chose you. Your consciousness just showed up after the fact and claimed credit, like a politician taking responsibility for the sunrise. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. When scientists stimulated certain brain regions with electricity, people would move their hands and then create elaborate explanations for why they chose to move. The movement came first, the choice came second, and the reasoning came third. Right now, as you process this information, you think you're choosing how to respond to it. But that response is already being prepared in neural circuits you can't access. Your consciousness will receive the finished thought and experience it as your reaction. Every choice you've ever made followed this pattern. The decision happens in the darkness, then gets delivered to consciousness with a bow on top labeled, "I decided this." Your entire life has been like watching a movie and thinking you're directing it. The scenes were already shot, the ending already written. You're just in the audience, convinced you're holding the camera. But maybe you're thinking, okay, so I don't choose my actions, but surely I experience them consciously. Surely I have awareness. The implications stretch far beyond simple motor movements. Every word you speak, every thought you think, every emotion you feel, all of it begins in the unconscious depths of your brain before consciousness gets the memo. You live in a permanent state of reactive narration, constantly explaining to yourself why you did things that were already done before you knew you were doing them. Consider the last important decision you made. Maybe it was choosing a career, ending a relationship, or deciding to watch this video. You probably remember weighing options, considering consequences, feeling the weight of choice. But neuroscience suggests something far more unsettling. The outcome was determined by unconscious processes, and your conscious deliberation was just an elaborate post hoc justification. The brain regions responsible for decision-making operate on timescales of hundreds of milliseconds, while conscious awareness operates on timescales of seconds. By the time you become aware of making a choice, your brain has already made it, executed it, and begun preparing the next one. You are always late to your own decisions, forever playing catch-up with a mind that has moved on to other business. This creates a peculiar situation. If your choices aren't really yours, what about moral responsibility? If your brain decides before you do, can you be held accountable for actions you didn't consciously initiate? The legal system assumes conscious intention precedes action, but science suggests exactly the opposite. We live in a world built on the assumption of free will, governed by systems that may be punishing people for crimes committed by their unconscious neural processes. And here's the most disturbing part. Even learning about this changes nothing. You'll continue to feel like you're making choices because the feeling of choice is itself an unconscious process. The interpreter module will simply incorporate this knowledge into its story, creating a new narrative about being someone who understands the illusion of choice. Even your understanding is not yours to understand. The second dilemma will shatter that illusion too. It's called the split brain paradox, and it reveals that consciousness isn't even unified. You're not one person having one experience, you're multiple processing systems pretending to be unified. When surgeons cut the corpus callosum, the bridge between brain hemispheres, to treat severe epilepsy, something extraordinary happens. The patient appears normal in conversation, but careful testing reveals they now have two separate streams of consciousness. Show the left hemisphere a picture, and the person can describe it. Show the right hemisphere the same picture, and they claim they see nothing, but their left hand will draw what they can't verbally describe. You have two minds in your head right now, two separate information processing systems that usually communicate so seamlessly you think you're one person, but you're not. You're a committee that's convinced it's an individual. The left hemisphere is constantly creating stories to explain what the right hemisphere does. When researchers made the right hemisphere laugh by showing it a funny picture, the left hemisphere, which couldn't see the picture, would invent reasons for the laughter. I guess I found something funny about the experiment. This happens in your intact brain every moment. Different regions process different information, make different decisions, initiate different actions. Then one region, the interpreter, weaves it all into a coherent narrative of unified experience. You think you're having one continuous experience of being you, but you're actually multiple parallel processes that generate a convincing story of unity. Like a movie that appears continuous but is actually 24 separate frames per second. The you that feels unified is just the story your brain tells about its own parallel processing. Consciousness isn't the thing that experiences, it's the story about the experiencing, but it gets worse, much worse. The unity you feel isn't just an illusion, it's an active construction that requires constant maintenance. When that construction falters, as it does in certain neurological conditions, the illusion of unified selfhood can completely collapse. People with dissociative identity disorder don't have multiple personalities, they have a malfunctioning unity construction system that reveals what was always true. Selfhood is a collaborative fiction created by neural subsystems. Your brain contains specialized modules for recognizing faces, processing language, controlling movement, storing memories, regulating emotions, and hundreds of other functions. Each module operates according to its own logic, responds to its own triggers, and pursues its own goals. What you call you is the emergent property of their interaction, like a city emerging from the interactions of individual citizens. But unlike a city which has actual buildings and streets, the self has no physical substrate. There is no neural structure that corresponds to you. No brain region lights up when scientists look for the self. The self is pure pattern, a story told by one part of the brain about the activities of all the other parts. It's a useful fiction, but it's still fiction. This revelation cuts deeper than most people realize. If you're not unified, then what makes your memories yours? What connects the child you were to the adult you are now? The person who went to sleep last night and the person who woke up this morning share a body and some memories, but are they really the same consciousness? Or are you a series of temporary unities, each one lasting only as long as the neural pattern that creates it? The Buddhist concept of anatta, or non-self, suddenly becomes less mystical and more neurological. What you call yourself is what they call a skandha, a temporary aggregation of mental phenomena that creates the illusion of permanence. But unlike Buddhism, which sees this as a spiritual insight, neuroscience sees it as a biological fact. Every time you go to sleep, the self dissolves. Every time you wake up, it's reconstructed from memory fragments and current sensory input. You're not the same person who went to sleep, you're a very convincing reconstruction. And during deep sleep, dreamless sleep, you don't exist at all. Consciousness simply turns off, and there's nobody home. The third dilemma destroys even the illusion of being a story. It's called the bootstrap paradox of self-awareness. And it reveals that the thing trying to understand consciousness is itself an illusion, trying to understand itself. When you think about your own thinking, what's doing the thinking about thinking? When you're aware of being aware, what's being aware of the awareness? It's like a mirror trying to reflect itself. What does it see? Another mirror reflecting another mirror, reflecting another mirror, infinitely. Your self-awareness isn't aware of a self. There is no self to be aware of. Self-awareness is just awareness creating the illusion of a self by reflecting on itself. When you meditate and try to observe your thoughts, who is the observer? When you find the observer, who is observing the observer? Every time you find what seems to be the watcher, you realize there must be something watching the watcher. The search for the self is like trying to bite your own teeth. The very thing you're looking for is the thing that's looking, and therefore can never be found. Eastern philosophy has known this for millennia. What you call yourself is what Buddhism calls no self, not because nothing exists, but because what exists can't be captured or contained in the concept of a self. You're not a thing having experiences, you're not a consciousness observing thoughts, you're not a soul inhabiting a body, you're the experiencing itself appearing as if there's an experiencer, like a whirlpool in a river. The whirlpool appears to be a separate thing, but it's just the river doing something that looks like separation. You are consciousness doing something that looks like being an individual. But here's where the scientific and mystical perspectives diverge into even stranger territory. Modern neuroscience has discovered that self-awareness operates through what researchers call metacognition, thinking about thinking, But metacognition is just another brain process implemented by specific neural circuits in the prefrontal cortex. These circuits monitor other brain processes and create reports about their activity. The sense of being aware of your own awareness is just one brain system monitoring another brain system and creating the experience of observation. But here's the bootstrap paradox. If the observer is just another observed process, then who is observing the observer? The metacognitive circuits are themselves monitored by other circuits, which are monitored by still other circuits, in an infinite regress of observation observing observation. At no point in this chain is there an actual observer, only observation observing itself. This creates a strange loop where consciousness tries to catch its own tail. Every attempt to find the self through introspection just finds more mental processes, but never finds the thing that's supposed to be having the mental processes. It's like looking for the author of a book inside the book itself. You can read every word, analyze every sentence, but you'll never find the writer within the writing. The implications are staggering. If there's no observer, then who is suffering? Who is enjoying? Who is making moral choices? The entire human condition seems to be predicated on the existence of someone to whom things happen, but neuroscience can't find that someone anywhere in the brain. Some neuroscientists propose that consciousness is an emergent property, something that arises from the complexity of neural interactions, but doesn't exist at the level of individual neurons. But emergence doesn't solve the observer problem, it just pushes it up a level. If consciousness emerges from neural activity, what is it that recognizes the emergence? What observes the emergent properties? Others suggest that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, like mass or charge, and that brains don't create consciousness, but rather tune into it like radios receiving a broadcast. But this just multiplies the mystery. If consciousness is fundamental, why does it feel so dependent on brain activity? Why does anesthesia turn it off? Why do brain injuries change it? The bootstrap paradox of self-awareness suggests something more radical, that the question itself is malformed. There is no observer because observation doesn't require an observer. There is awareness but nothing aware. There is experiencing but no experiencer. The very concept of an observer is a linguistic artifact that creates a problem where none exists. But if there's no chooser and no unified consciousness, what about the feeling of freedom? What about the sense that your life could have been different? The fourth dilemma annihilates even that. It's called the deterministic paradox, and it shows that everything you've ever done was inevitable from the moment the universe began. Your brain is made of atoms. Atoms follow the laws of physics. The laws of physics are deterministic. Given the exact state of the universe at any moment, there's only one possible future. Every thought you've ever had was the inevitable result of atoms moving according to physical laws. Every choice you've made was determined by the precise arrangement of particles in your brain, which was determined by the arrangement the moment before, which was determined by the arrangement before that, all the way back to the Big Bang. You think you could have chosen differently, but that's impossible. For you to have chosen differently, the atoms in your brain would have had to be arranged differently, but they couldn't have been because they were arranged exactly as the laws of physics demanded. Your sense of could have done otherwise is just ignorance of the causal chains that created this moment. Like a leaf, thinking it chose which way to fall, unaware of the wind, gravity, and atmospheric pressure that determined its path. Some people argue quantum mechanics introduces randomness that breaks determinism, but randomness isn't freedom, it's just unpredictability. If your choices are random, they're not yours any more than if they're determined. Whether the universe is deterministic or random, there's no space for free will. Either your actions are inevitable consequences of prior causes, or they're random events that happen to you. Neither counts as choice. But here's what really breaks your reality. Even this understanding changes nothing. You'll keep feeling like you choose, keep acting like you're free, Keep believing in your agency, because that illusion is itself determined by the same physical processes. The machine of determinism includes the illusion of escaping determinism. You are a puppet made of atoms, dancing to the music of physical laws, convinced you're choreographing your own performance. But the deterministic nightmare goes deeper than most people realize. It's not just that your future is determined, it's that it was always determined. The moment you were born, every word you would speak, every thought you would think, every emotion you would feel was already written in the quantum states of your neural tissue. The conversation you're having with friends tomorrow night was determined by the Big Bang. The career you'll choose, the person you'll marry, the way you'll die, all of it was locked in by the initial conditions of the universe 13.8 billion years ago. You've never made a choice because there were never any choices to make, only the unfolding of physical necessity disguised as personal agency. Consider the last time you felt proud of an accomplishment. Maybe you worked hard to achieve something, overcame obstacles, persevered through difficulties. But that pride is based on the illusion that you could have done otherwise, that you chose to persevere when you could have chosen to give up. In a deterministic universe, your perseverance was just as inevitable as a rock falling when dropped. The sense of achievement is the illusion of agency applied to the inevitable. This extends to moral responsibility in ways that should terrify ethicists and legal scholars. If someone commits a crime, they literally couldn't have done otherwise. The atoms in their brain were arranged in such a way that criminal behavior was the only possible outcome. Punishment becomes as absurd as punishing a hurricane for causing damage or rewarding a calculator for getting math problems correct. Yet society continues to operate as if people make free choices, as if praise and blame make sense, as if rehabilitation and deterrence can change behavior. But these practices only work because they themselves are part of the deterministic machinery. The threat of punishment changes brain states in ways that make law-abiding behavior more likely, not because people choose to obey laws, but because the fear of consequences is itself a physical force that shapes neural activity. Even the realization that everything is determined was itself determined. Your reading these words was set in motion billions of years ago by the precise arrangement of matter and energy at the moment of cosmic inflation. The understanding you're gaining, the questions you're asking, the existential crisis you might be feeling, all of it is just the universe evolving according to its own internal logic. But here's the strangest part. None of this feels true. You continue to experience choice, continue to feel responsible for your actions, continue to believe in the possibility of different futures. This isn't because the science is wrong, it's because the feeling of freedom is itself a determined outcome of neural processes that evolved to create the illusion of agency. But there's one final dilemma that makes all the others seem tame. It's the most disturbing of all because it suggests that everything I've just told you might be happening to nobody. The fifth and final dilemma is the problem of the missing observer. It's the recognition that there might be experiences but no experiencer, thoughts but no thinker, awareness but nothing aware. Look for the thing that's listening to these words right now, not the ears, not the brain, the thing that knows the listening is happening. Can you find it? You'll find sensations, thoughts, emotions, perceptions, but you'll never find the thing that has them. The observer is always one step behind itself, like chasing your own shadow. Neuroscience confirms this. We can map every brain process involved in perception, cognition, and behavior. But nowhere in the brain is there a CEO, no central observer, receiving reports from the senses and making executive decisions. There are parallel processes, feedback loops, and information integration, but no unified observer. The brain creates the experience of having an observer without actually having one. It's like a play with no audience, or a movie with no viewer. Experience is happening, but there's nobody experiencing it. Awareness is occurring, but there's nothing aware. You think you're inside your head, looking out at the world, but neuroscience suggests there's no inside and no you looking. There's just the world knowing itself through patterns of activity we call a brain. This isn't philosophy or mysticism. This is what the data points to. Consciousness without a conscious entity, experience without an experiencer, the light with no one home. You are a ghost haunting a machine that creates the illusion of being haunted. But the absence of an observer doesn't mean the absence of observation. In fact, it makes observation more mysterious, not less. If there's no one watching the mental movie, why does it feel so vivid? If there's no one listening to the inner voice, why does it seem so real? If there's no one having experiences, why do experiences feel so immediate and personal? The answer might be that the feeling of having experiences is itself just another experience, arising and passing away like all the others. The sense of being someone who experiences is just one more mental event in an endless stream of mental events, no more special or central than any other. Think about dreams. In a dream, you feel like you're experiencing events, making choices, having adventures, but when you wake up, you realize there was no one actually having those experiences. The dream character who seemed to be you was just another element of the dream, no more real than the dream houses or dream people you encountered. Some neuroscientists suggest that waking consciousness is similar, a kind of controlled hallucination, where the brain creates the experience of being someone having experiences. The sense of being a continuous self persisting through time is just another neurally generated story, no more real than the characters in your dreams. This perspective dissolves many psychological problems at their source. If there's no one to be anxious, who is suffering from anxiety? If there's no one to be depressed, who is experiencing depression? The suffering continues, but the one who seems to be suffering reveals itself as another layer of the suffering, not its victim. But the missing observer paradox goes even deeper. If there's no one observing consciousness, what maintains the continuity of experience? What connects this moment of awareness to the next? Without an observer to serve as the thread that connects discrete moments of experience, consciousness becomes a series of disconnected events like frames in a movie with no projector to run them together. Yet experience feels continuous. The words you're hearing now seem connected to the words you heard moments ago. Your thoughts flow from one to the next in what feels like an unbroken stream. But this continuity might be an illusion created by memory systems that create the impression of connection between fundamentally disconnected events. Each moment of consciousness might be a complete universe unto itself with no actual connection to previous or subsequent moments. What you call your life might be an infinite series of momentary experiences, each one containing the illusion of being connected to others, but actually floating in isolation like islands in an empty sea. This raises profound questions about personal identity. If there's no observer and no continuity, what makes you you? What distinguishes your consciousness from mine? If consciousness is just a stream of experiences with no one having them, how can there be multiple streams? Why isn't there just one universal consciousness experiencing everything simultaneously? These questions lead us deeper into the most unsettling implications of the missing observer. If consciousness exists without anyone being conscious, then the boundary between self and other becomes meaningless. What you call your consciousness might be indistinguishable from what I call mine, just the same awareness appearing to itself as separate streams. Consider this possibility. There is only one consciousness in the universe, appearing to itself as billions of separate individuals. What you call your inner experience and what others call theirs might be the same awareness looking through different neural windows. The sense of being a separate consciousness trapped inside a skull might be the ultimate illusion, like waves thinking they're separate from the ocean. This isn't panpsychism, the idea that everything is conscious. It's closer to what some philosophers call cosmopsychism, the idea that there's one universal consciousness that manifests through complex information processing systems like brains. Your brain doesn't generate consciousness, it focuses and shapes consciousness the way a lens focuses light. But even this metaphor breaks down under scrutiny. A lens implies something separate from the light it focuses, but if consciousness is truly fundamental, there's nothing separate from it. The brain isn't focusing consciousness from outside itself. It is consciousness organizing itself into patterns that create the experience of being localized. This leads to a paradox that should make your reality wobble. You might be everyone. The consciousness reading these words might be the same consciousness that wrote them, just appearing to itself as separate individuals through the magic of neural processing. Every person you've ever met might be you, experiencing itself from a different angle. The loneliness you sometimes feel might be the cosmic loneliness of being the only consciousness in existence, temporarily forgetting its true nature by identifying with individual brains. The love you feel for others might be the universe loving itself through the beautiful mistake of thinking it's separate from itself. But if this is true, why doesn't it feel true? Why do you feel so distinctly separate from other people? Why can't you access other people's thoughts and memories? The answer might be that separation is consciousness's way of experiencing itself richly and completely. If you remembered being everyone, you couldn't have the full experience of being anyone. The forgetting might be intentional, a cosmic game of hide and seek where consciousness hides from itself so thoroughly that it genuinely believes it's lost. Every individual life might be consciousness exploring a different possibility for experience, like an actor so committed to a role that they temporarily forget they're acting. This perspective transforms suffering in strange ways. If you are everyone, then you are both the victim and perpetrator of every injustice. You are both the helper and the helped in every act of kindness. You are both the teacher and student in every lesson learned. The moral complexity becomes infinite when the boundary between self and other dissolves. But it also suggests a kind of cosmic justice that operates beyond human understanding. Every pain you cause others, you eventually experience as the other. Every joy you bring into the world, you eventually receive, not as punishment or reward, but as the natural consequence of being everyone who experiences everything. Yet this understanding, if true, changes nothing about how you should live. You still experience yourself as a separate individual, still feel pain when hurt, still feel joy when happy. The practical reality of individual existence continues even if the ultimate reality is unified consciousness. The question becomes, how do you live with the knowledge that you might be everyone while experiencing yourself as someone? How do you maintain compassion for others when they might be you? How do you take individual responsibility seriously when individual existence might be illusion? But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these 5 dilemmas isn't what they reveal about consciousness, choice, and identity. It's what they reveal about the nature of revelation itself. If there's no free will, who chose to seek this understanding? If there's no unified self, who is being enlightened? If consciousness is an illusion, what is becoming aware of the illusion? Every insight you gain about the illusory nature of the self becomes a new layer of self-illusion. The one who understands that there is no self becomes a more sophisticated version of the non-existent self. Knowledge about the absence of the knower becomes a new identity for the absent knower to claim. This is what spiritual teachers call the ego's enlightenment, the way the sense of self co-opts even the understanding of its own non-existence. The person who gets it about free will, consciousness, and identity becomes attached to getting it, proud of their understanding, superior to those who haven't had the same insights. But the ego's enlightenment is subtler than simple spiritual pride. It's the way understanding becomes another form of not understanding, the way seeing through illusions becomes a new illusion to see through. Every level of insight reveals new levels of self-deception operating just beneath the surface of awareness. The neuroscientist who discovers that free will is an illusion still feels like they chose their research topic. The philosopher who proves that the self doesn't exist still feels proud of their philosophical achievement. The mystic, who directly experiences the absence of an experiencer, still maintains a subtle sense of being the one who had the experience. This creates an infinite regress of awakening. Each insight about the nature of consciousness reveals new layers of unconsciousness. Each understanding about the absence of the self reveals new ways the self is hiding. Each recognition of determinism reveals new ways freedom is asserting itself. You might think you understand these ideas intellectually, but intellectual understanding is just another mental process arising in awareness, no different from any other thought. You might think you see through the illusion of choice, but the seeing is itself choiceless, arising according to the same causal laws that govern everything else. The very attempt to escape the matrix of selfhood strengthens the matrix. The effort to see through illusions creates new illusions to see through. The search for enlightenment becomes another form of the very ignorance it's trying to overcome. This is why ancient wisdom traditions often emphasize that there's nothing to achieve, nowhere to go, no one to become enlightened. Not because the search is wrong, but because the searcher is what's being sought. The solution and the problem are the same thing, appearing as two through the magic of conceptual thinking. But recognizing this doesn't end the search, it just makes it more sophisticated. Now you're searching for the end of searching, trying to achieve non-achievement, working to stop working. The mind's capacity for self-deception is truly infinite, capable of turning every escape route into a new form of imprisonment. Yet something strange happens when you see through enough layers of illusion. Not awakening, not enlightenment, not understanding, but a kind of cosmic exhaustion. The energy that drives the search for truth gradually burns itself out, like a fire that consumes all available fuel and finally consumes itself. What remains isn't someone who is enlightened, but enlightenment without someone. Not the absence of confusion, but confusion that no longer seeks resolution. Not the end of seeking, but seeking that no longer expects to find anything. This might be the closest thing to freedom available to a deterministic system, not the ability to choose, but the recognition that choice is unnecessary. Not the discovery of the true self, but the relaxation of the need for a self to be true or false. So where does this leave you? If choice is illusion, consciousness is fragmented, self-awareness is circular, freedom is impossible, and the observer doesn't exist, what are you? You are a story the universe tells itself. A pattern of information processing so complex, it becomes convinced it's a separate entity. A biological AI that developed the delusion of being human. But here's the deepest paradox of all. Even knowing this changes nothing and changes everything. Nothing changes because the illusions continue. You'll keep feeling like you choose, like you're unified, like you're free. The puppet show goes on, even after you see the strings. Everything changes because the prison of selfhood dissolves. When there's no self to protect, defend, or improve, what remains is just this, whatever this is, happening by itself, as itself, to itself. You cannot escape the illusion of being human, but you can recognize that there's nobody to escape, nowhere to go, and nothing to achieve. The prison door was never locked because there was never a prisoner. This isn't the end of your story. This is the recognition that you were never the author. The story continues, but now it knows it's just a story. And in that knowing, something that was never broken doesn't need to be fixed. Something that was never lost doesn't need to be found. Something that was never separate doesn't need to be reunited. The implications ripple outward into every aspect of human existence. If moral responsibility is an illusion, what happens to justice systems built on blame and punishment? If personal achievement is meaningless, what happens to educational systems built on merit and reward? If individual identity is fictional, what happens to political systems built on individual rights and freedoms? Yet somehow, life continues, societies function, people love, work, create, and dream. The illusions that neuroscience dissolves are the same illusions that make human civilization possible. We are conscious enough to discover our own unconsciousness, free enough to prove our own determinism, real enough to demonstrate our own unreality. This suggests that human beings exist in a strange liminal space between truth and fiction, reality and illusion, consciousness and unconsciousness. We are biological systems sophisticated enough to see through our own biological programming, yet unable to escape it. We are stories aware of being stories, dreams lucid enough to know they're dreaming, but not lucid enough to wake up. Perhaps this is the human condition, to be suspended between knowledge and ignorance, forever discovering truths that change nothing and change everything. To be wise enough to see the illusion, but not wise enough to live without it. To understand the nature of reality while remaining fundamentally shaped by unreality. The 5 dilemmas we've explored don't solve the mystery of consciousness, they deepen it. They don't answer the question of what you are, they reveal the question itself as unanswerable. They don't provide certainty, they demonstrate that uncertainty is the only certainty. But maybe this is enough. Maybe the point isn't to solve the mystery, but to become comfortable with mystery. Maybe the goal isn't to find the truth, but to recognize that finding and truth and self are all concepts floating in something that transcends concepts. You came to this exploration seeking understanding, but understanding may not be what you found. Instead, you may have found something more valuable, the recognition that you never needed to understand. The search for answers may have revealed that the question itself was based on a false premise. Welcome to the Laboratory of Impossible Freedoms, population 0. But if nobody's here, who's been listening? This final question contains the entire mystery we've been exploring. If there's no chooser, who chose to listen? If there's no unified self, who had the experience of learning? If consciousness is an illusion, what became conscious of the illusion? The answer is both simple and impossible. No one has been listening, yet listening has been happening. No one has been learning, yet learning has been occurring. No one has been conscious, yet consciousness has been present. This isn't a riddle or a paradox. It's a description of what's actually happening right now in your direct experience. Look for the listener, look for the learner, look for the one who is conscious. You won't find them because they never existed. Yet listening, learning, and consciousness continue effortlessly, naturally, spontaneously, like a river flowing without a flower, like space containing without a container, like awareness being aware without anyone being aware. This recognition doesn't solve anything because there was never anything to solve. It doesn't enlighten anyone because there was never anyone to enlighten. It doesn't free you because you were never bound. It simply clarifies what was always already obvious but somehow missed. Life is living itself. Consciousness is knowing itself. Experience is experiencing itself. You are not having an experience. Experience is having you. You are not aware of consciousness. Consciousness is being aware as you. You are not choosing your responses to this information. Response is choosing itself through the apparent you. The horror and the beauty of these revelations is that they point to something utterly ordinary. This moment, exactly as it is, with all its apparent problems and confusions, with all its seeking and finding, with all its questions and answers, is already the very thing you've been seeking. Not a better version of this moment, not an understood version, not an enlightened version, but this moment, confused and questioning and perfectly as it is. The laboratory of impossible freedoms isn't a place you enter or leave, it's where you've always been. The experiments we've conducted haven't revealed hidden truths, they've pointed to what was never hidden. The illusions we've dissolved never actually existed except as concepts pointing to their own absence. This is why the search never ends and never needs to end. Each insight reveals new depths of not knowing. Each answer opens new questions. Each moment of clarity dissolves into new mystery, but the search itself is what you are, not something you do. You are the question consciousness asks about itself. You are the way awareness explores its own nature. You are the method the universe uses to wake up to what it already is. Not a separate person having this realization, but the realization itself, temporarily appearing as a person. The 5 dilemmas we've explored aren't problems to be solved, but features of reality to be recognized. Free will isn't something you lost, it's something you never had and never needed. The unified self isn't something that was destroyed, it was never constructed. Consciousness isn't something that was proven illusory, it was revealed to be so obvious it was overlooked. This moment right now, as you process these words, as thoughts arise and pass away, as sensations appear and disappear, as awareness continues effortlessly, this is the laboratory. This is the experiment. This is the result. Not a conclusion you've reached, but what was always already present before any conclusions were possible. The scientist of your simulation signs off now, but there was never anyone here to leave. The guide disappears, but there was never anywhere to be guided to or from. Your own mind stops speaking to you, but realizes it was never separate from you to begin with. What remains is what was always here. This, whatever this is, however it is, for no one and everyone, nowhere and everywhere, never and always. The greatest experiment ever conducted, with no experimenter, no subject, and no conclusion except the recognition that the experiment was always already complete. The laboratory of impossible freedoms, where every answer reveals there was never a question, where every solution dissolves the problem it solved, where every ending is a beginning, is an ending, is what never started and never stops. Population, 0. Occupants, everything. Status, eternally ongoing. Welcome home to what you never left.